So we have a lot to get through tonight. We're going to talk a little bit first, Idris, about your background, your training, which led up to you founding WINNIE. And then after we've moved through that, we're obviously going to talk about the fashion show itself and the line that you've just released, which, as I said, was shown here at the library. And we're going to speak about the literary heritage that informed this line. And then I'd like us to turn to Fashion Week overall to consider the trends that we saw and the different directions that we think menswear might be moving. So we're going to get started with your work at Savile Row. You were an apprentice there at age 14, which is quite remarkable. And you've said about this time that this was really where you learned an appreciation for detail, integrity, technique, and craft. You said that you had a sort of romanticized idea of being able to make clothes with your bare hands from scratch, which you said seemed like magic. So tell us about how this period of your career informed the attention to detail and technique that we see in your clothing today.
First of all, sorry everyone. I lost my voice yesterday, so I sound
You worked
like
a bit too hard on the show.
yeah, I sound like some crazy person, but yeah, you all have to bear with me. Anyway, first, thank you for the amazing introduction. I'm extremely humbled to have all of you here to listen to just some random guy talk about clothes for an hour. And I'm really grateful to the library for giving me a platform to show the collection. And me and Julie, we're extremely excited to be here. So thank you for that. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, Savile Row for me was an amazing experience. I mean, Hardy Amy's where I worked, which is actually the first place where Julie did her styling as well. And we'd never met each other before then, but that's quite poetic in a way. But yeah, I mean, it was an experience, and it was an experience that a lot of designers don't get to actually take part in. I got to fall in love with fashion, not for the runway shows or not for the glitz and the glamour, if you will, but more for the artisanry, you know, more for the idea that you can turn a flat piece of fabric into a sculpture of sorts, and what clothes mean to people, you know, as a thing of self-expression and understanding the anatomy and trying to just play with lines and cuts and fabrications and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it was an experience. I did that for 4 years, and I take every lesson that I learned there everywhere with me. I mean, my very first job was doing buttonholes for 8 hours a day, yeah, by hand. And I did buttonholes yesterday for the show. You know what I mean? Like, Julie was like, "I need you to move this button," and I was like, "Yeah, no problem."
I got it.
So yeah, I mean, I take that experience with me, and it really I carry it every day. So yeah.
I'm struck by in both of your respective works, you have such an interest in fashion as a means of self-expression, as a means of exploring one's own identity, the self. Julie, I'm wondering if you could speak to your own experience in Savile Row, as I didn't realize that you had been there as well. How did this inform your stylistic practice today?
I mean, for me, my experience on Savile Row was as a stylist. Hardy Amy's was the first runway show that I had ever styled, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, I came into fashion through a different means than Idris, because I never intended to be a stylist. I never intended to work in fashion. I thought I would be a curator, in all truth, or a professor, yeah. But at a certain point, I came to see fashion as an art form, and the sculptural aspect is so, as you were saying, it's so important to how I see and how I see form. And I think tailoring for me is an obsession because of that, because it is a perfection of form. So yeah, so it just kind of eventually maybe came full circle that my first show would really be some for a brand like Hardy Amy's, that that two people are getting so impeccably attuned to the finer details, and and I think from there it just built on and on, yeah. So.
And so we start with this intense training, this intense foundation of attention to detail, of silhouette, of form, of I love this idea of sculpting that you're both using, that fabric is the raw material out of which you construct the shapes that then adorn us, that we walk around in. And I think it's striking that you moved from this, Idris, to your work under Christopher Bailey, about which you've said that it taught you to think of design as poetry. How is this different from the attention to form, to detail that you were learning at Savile Row?
Yeah, I mean, when you learn how to cut and you learn how to sew and you learn how to draft the pattern and all of those things, exactly what you said, and is that sculpture aspect. But you're kind of following rules in a way, right? Because the idea of Savile Row is all about heritage. The idea of Savile Row is about transcribing, things that have long existed before your time, and then you're sort of carrying the beacon for you as your it's your turn. It's your lifetime. You're carrying that beacon now. So we've cut this lapel for in this many centimeters for 150 years, and now it's your turn to cut that same lapel, and it's very prideful. Like, you feel a sense of pride from that, because I think I was the in within the generations of Hardy Amy's, I think I was like number 18 or whatever of cutters that have come through that house, and that's amazing. But then the creativity aspect, the idea to break those rules. I was speaking with someone yesterday, in an interviewer, and he was asking me about Savile Row and creativity, and I was saying, I think you need to understand those rules in order for you to break them, and I think that's what Savile Row did for me. It taught me how to sculpt. It's kind of like the way in the days since past, in order for you to be considered a maestro as an artist, you were told to just sketch a bird, like, so you could be Picasso and do all these extreme cubism stuff, or you could be Pollock or whoever and have all these other ways of expressing yourself. But if you didn't understand the anatomy of just sketching a bird and just having like a sort of a life-size realist bird, then are you really a maestro? Because you need to understand those rules first in order for you to break them. And that's what Burberry did for me. Christopher Bailey, I mean, was an amazing boss. I mean, I didn't know what a designer was. Like, very similar to what Julie was saying. When you come from a Savile Row background, you're very much tethered in anatomy and sculpture and lines and pattern drafting and making the best suit possible. And the day I met Christopher Bailey, that all changed for me, because he really opened my eyes and showed me really amazing things, and that really widened my perspective. And as a creative director, the reason I say he made me feel like fashion was poetry was his approach was extremely rooted in things that he was extremely passionate about. Like, we did a collection that was inspired by the book Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and I remember reading that book in high school, and I was naive and I hated it.
We've all been there.
I didn't understand the importance. It was a school project. But then rereading it for a collection, it really inspired me. The idea of being born, a man turning into a woman, and the idea of this book coming out years and years ago, dealing with issues and speaking about issues that we still deal with today. that really inspired me, and it made me think, oh, clothes can be just more than, dressing for the weather. Clothes can be something to inspire. Clothes can be something to push people to stories and narratives. And Christopher Bailey and Burberry is where I learned that.
And in a way, clothes can reveal art to you as well. That the fact that your relationship with clothing was what enabled you to return to Orlando and kind of have this different perspective towards it. I'm so struck by what you said about needing to learn the rules, needing to have the heritage in order to break it. Julie, I wonder if you could speak to this notion of first you learn the rules, then you learn how to break them, and maybe tell us when you started to break the rules in your own work.
In all truth, I think maybe to the opposite. I've been always breaking the rules. I don't think I've always broken the rules in the sense of how my career has come to play. Like the very fact that I came into fashion was me being a bit of a punk because someone had told me I couldn't. So it started from there. I mean, I came from the poetry first, perhaps, in the sense that I was an academic. It was all about books and words and art. I studied philosophy. I studied with Allen Ginsberg just before he died. So it was always, which is also another full circle coming to this with Idris.
So many full circle moments.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
We've been on the same path through different means for so many years, and it's incredible to now be on the same team. So I mean, I was breaking the rules, but then as it comes to clothes, I learned everything on the job because I didn't have a fashion background. I could talk about art, I can talk about literature, I can talk about philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. Fashion didn't speak to me until it clicked for me that fashion is poetry in the sense that we all get dressed every day, we all adorn ourselves, so we all have our references, whether we're aware of them or not. And we take everything that we experience into our own personal stories. And that, for me, became the hook. And so from there, I started to learn more about fashion. And then through the work that I've done, I've learned a lot more. Like, for example, in working with brands like Hardy Amy's and then eventually Xenia, which is a brand that I work for. And I've learned so much about tailoring and form. And from that, I can go back to being a punk and mess with the rules to what you were saying, because now I know them. Like, I mean, I'm not a tailor, however, I know how it works, but I also see clothing on people the same way I see a sculpture or an artwork, and I see them through the same lens. So in that sense,
It's a sort of tailor-punk dialectic. You become one, then you become the other, and then you sort of become the synthesis of the two through the negation.
Exactly, and eventually they just are in one body.
and then suddenly it's you. I wanna talk about WINNIE New York. So you work at Burberry under Christopher Bailey, then you work at Tom Ford for a while, and then in 2019 you decide to start your own label. This is inspired by your grandmother, Princess Winifred d'Ademou. Tell us what pushed you to take this leap.
I mean, so at that bit, it was after Burberry. I mean, I began working for Burberry. I think I was like 20, 21, 22 years old. I was a kid. I didn't know anything. And then, but they were extremely nice and patient with me because I was messing up a lot of stuff. But nonetheless, eventually I got the gist of it. And I started working for Tom Ford, and that was another crazy experience. And that really taught me about the identity of uber luxury, because I always thought doing Savile on a mass scale was impossible. Like I always just thought, this is what they teach you on Savile. Like ready to wear is unimportant, and it's not true luxury or whatever. And Tom Ford really showed me that you can scale that. You can create something that's really special for the masses, and it doesn't have to be elitist in a way. and for one person. To me, that's the true identity of luxury. Like I always say, real luxury is a community. You know, real luxury is having people to lean on and stuff like that. So, I mean, anyway, I'm spiraling, but
No.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, I started the brand in 2019 because my grandmother had just passed, and I went to go see her in Nigeria, and for her funeral, and it really it changed so much in me because she was the only person, because I was 14 years old and I wanted to be a tailor, which makes no sense because there's no money in tailoring. You know, most kids want to be a footballer, or most kids want to be a basketball player, or
Astronaut,
an astronaut, or
firefighter.
a doctor even. And I wanted to be a tailor, and so my grandmother was the only one who was like, "I think you should do it," you know, and that I really wanted to make her proud and make sure that she felt like she was right, you know, not even that I was right, but that she was right, and she was right to stick up for me. And so I worked extremely hard at Burberry and Tom Ford, and I'd worked at that point 10 years between both brands, and I hadn't seen her once, you know, because I was always working and I was always moving around. So when she passed, it really hurt me, and so I wanted to do something in her honor and something that was like an ode to her memory, and because through her belief, I'm here. You know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. I'd probably be, I don't know, an engineer or something. So yeah,
Or a footballer.
or football.
I have a sort of a challenge for both of you. I think I'd like you both to try in the most concise way possible to describe to us what you think the essence of WINNIE New York is. And the person who uses the fewest amount of words wins. You go first.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And the person who uses the least amount of words win. But then you said it's a sentence, yeah.
Yes.
So then it has to be more than one word.
It doesn't have to be a complete sentence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Community.
Mm.
That's what I would say.
No fair. I'm going to have to use more words.
You can't beat me unless you use a shorter word.
Clothes. No.
All right, it's a tie.
It's an emerging, ever-evolving wardrobe for humans. I think that was the thing that struck me yesterday as I was really looking at our cast, and I was looking at the styling, I was looking at the clothes, and I'm looking at everybody there. And and even some of the commentary after was that it felt like the models were wearing clothes from their own closet. And in that sense, that's the most incredible compliment, because it's not that we're here dressing people up. You're not making clothes, you know, for people to be in a costume. I'm not styling those clothes for people to look like they're in a costume. We had fun. There was an energy and an expression of different selves. But at the end of the day, everyone walking that runway looked like they owned their clothes. And that, I think, is the essence of WINNIE, to completely lose this challenge.
Yeah, I agree, but you lose. Yeah.
But you've lost it with immense dignity and eloquence, so we'll allow it. I'm so struck by what you say, because I think there are 2 points that we can identify there that both really speak to what I see WINNIE as well. And one is sort of wearability, the fact that everything that's made goes on the human body and can be conceived as something one would wear out into the world. And the other is this sort of tapping into the present moment. It's clothing of today. It's clothing that speaks to the world around us. And of course, it's clothing that is made by and for community. So I want to turn to the Ted Joans inspired collection that you showed yesterday. Ted Joans, for those who are not familiar with him, was a poet. He was a jazz artist. He was a sculptor. He lived in Paris for many years and frequented the American Library. Tell us how you arrived at him, and more largely at the tradition of the beat poets as the source of inspiration for this line.
Yeah, I mean, Ted Joans, man. I mean, what a spirit. Like, I never knew him. I never got a chance to meet him, unfortunately. I'm too freaking young, but I wish I did, you know, like through just working on this collection, I feel like I know him. Like his spirit was definitely present. But yeah, I mean, the way I stumbled on Ted Joans was through Langston Hughes. Like I love Langston Hughes. I listen to Langston Hughes jazz poetry in the morning. It just soothes me. And I was speaking to a friend, and I was telling him how much I love Langston Hughes, and we were also talking about the surrealist movement for some reason. And I was saying that I feel like I have surrealist characteristics sometimes. I could be a little bit quirky and weird, like showing up to a talk without a voice, you know? It's like a dream.
There is something a bit surrealist to it.
It's really odd. But so we were talking about that, and he goes, you know, there's this poet who is considered a surrealist, and I found that fascinating because poetry in itself is topsy-turvy. You know, it feeds within itself, and that's what makes it deep, I guess, is the word. I wanted to find a better word, but that's what I came up with. But that really intrigued me, and so yeah, I started to research this guy, Ted Joans, and he was just the coolest guy ever. You know, like I watched some jazz poetry that he would do, and I loved his poem, "Jazz Is My Religion." I love that poem, which to me is almost a song, you know. And his other poem that really spoke to me and really inspired the collection was his poem, "The Truth," which he talks about poetry, and he talks about the identity of a poet, and how if you see someone walking on the street acting crazy and waving his hand and screaming nothingness into the vastness of the universe, like, don't be afraid, because that man is a poet, and you have nothing to fear from a poet but the truth. And that really resonated with me, because I have always tried to push something like that when it pertains to my work in fashion. And so, yeah, that really was the in, and why I was like, yes, I need to make this collection inspired by Ted Joans.
I'm so glad that you brought up the poem "Jazz Is My Religion," because this was also played during your show. You set it to a jazz soundtrack, and the line that Ted Joans is sort of famous for is "Jazz is my religion, surrealism is my point of view." Why choose to play this while the show is taking place as opposed to a song or silence?
I think one of the things that saddened me about reading up on Ted Joans and really researching was the fact that he wasn't celebrated in his lifetime. And a lot of people don't know his name, you know. And if I can get a room full of people from Vogue and GQ and Le Shalom or whatever editorial people to be in a room and highlight someone that I feel like is amazing and deserves it, then I think I should. And I thought it was the perfect way for them to really get it, because Ted Joans, to quote Ted Joans or to create things inspired by Ted Joans is one thing, but for you to hear his voice, which is the way poetry is meant to be consumed. Poetry is not meant to be read. It's meant to be read, but it's meant to be read aloud. You're meant to consume it with your ears as well as your eyes. And so if they're consuming the fashion inspired by Ted Joans with their eyes, they should hear his voice, you know, through their ears, and then in a way it's like them experiencing fashion in a different sort of dimension, I guess.
And when you consider your own self-identified surrealism, you know, the fact that one could hear fashion is in itself quite surreal. You're playing with multimedia in a way there that's so compelling. Julie, when you hear these lines, jazz is my religion, surrealism is my point of view. How do you express that stylistically? How do you kind of infuse that into this show?
I think movement is the thing that that comes to mind when you think about jazz as a religion, surrealism as as your poetry, as your expression. It's and knowing that these bodies will be moving in form, in formation. You just think about how each of us moves through the world in which we live. So it's like you take the the micro of Ted Joans and then bring it into the current today, thinking about who it is that we create with on a daily basis, who it is that we're speaking to as a wider audience, the WINNIE wearer eventually, and even thinking about some of our other collaborators on the show. Joseph Maddock was read throughout the walk up until the finale, and he collaborated with Polly Lovejoy, who did the music. And so having a current day poet, and really informing that this is not something that we only look to from a historical context, but that we are moving through where we are now, moving into the future, and so thinking about that dialogue. So I think that's where, from a styling perspective, I took it.
I'm so struck that we keep returning to the very themes that you identified as essential to WINNIE, this idea of the togetherness, the community, the idea that it's real clothing that will be worn, that speaks to the present moment, because there's a relationship there to what you were saying Ted Joans describes truth as. In a way, it seems like your fashion is true. It's clothing that's meant to be real, to speak to something that's real around us. I want to consider more this notion of community, because it's so central to what you're doing. In the press release for this fantastic show, you had some lovely quotes that I'd like to read. So you said that there's no one or another, it's all about unifying. You said that you're shepherding the aura of community, and I was struck as well by the poem that was read by Joseph. I believe the line that he repeated kind of over and over again was "Winnie is I." Was I correct in hearing that? So how do you gather this sort of collective I of WINNIE? What different aspects of the team go into that work when you're putting on a show? Where is your community, and how do you spread them out and balance?
I think, my community and, our communities everywhere, especially in 2024, there's so much looming, so much we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, And I think community is more important than ever, my community is here right now. There's 50 people here, and we should all get to know each other. Like, I was reading something about Ted Joans, and he was doing a book signing in San Francisco, and a man who was a fan of his work went to the book signing, and Ted Joans was like, "Hey, you want to meet for coffee tomorrow?" Just normal chatting. And in the end of the day, Ted Joans was his best man at his wedding, And I think these are things that don't happen anymore. People are always on slabs on their phone. So community is way important right now. And the way that I want WINNIE to incorporate that is I'm extremely collaborative. Extremely. I'm extremely collaborative. I have so many people to thank. Julie, of course, is a big part of that. But so many people to thank. You, Carolyn, Morgan, who helped me move furniture on the day of. My wife, Sarah, Kelvin, Gabriel, Pierre, Alex. So many people took part. Paulie, Joseph, Ted Joans. So many people took part. I can't take credit for it. I can't say, "Oh yeah, I just woke up one day and all of this stuff came together." That would be narcissistic of me, and I don't think that you can do anything beautiful or monumental with our community.
I actually wanted to speak a bit specifically about Ted Jones's role in the Paris community as well. As I said, he frequented the library. We have this fantastic collection of his books, which are actually signed by him. And before this talk began, I received an email from another Paris-based author who some of you might know, Jake Lamar, who was a close friend of Ted Joans, and he sent us a picture, if we could see it really quickly. This is just a lovely note. Yeah, he says, this is a picture of him, he said 30 years ago, at a reading with Ted Joans, celebrating Langston Hughes' 92nd birthday, and meeting Ted Joans inspired him to pursue his life in Paris. So it's so special for us to be able to celebrate, as you said, to give this platform to Ted Joans posthumously. Yeah, yeah.
How cool is Ted Joans?
He's so cool, guys. He's so cool. We are rapidly and horrifyingly running out of time. I want to quickly have a look at as well at some of the actual pieces of clothing that were made for the show. We've talked a lot about the philosophy, but I want to consider craft and technique as well. So we've got some images of the show. There are two things I want to ask you. First, why on earth would you stage a fashion show in a library? And second, on a more concrete level, can you tell us what we're looking at here in terms of the stylistic features that you're playing with?
I mean, I wanted to do it in the library because I just felt like it carried the spirit of Ted Joans. And of course, like, I'd reached out before I even knew that there were signed copies of Ted Joans in here. But I really wanted to drive home that idea of community, and I was thinking about community spaces, and the library being a big, big one of them, and one of them that is underappreciated, in my opinion, very much like Ted Joans. And I think I wanted to really, drive that action from whatever little bit of crowd that I can pull, to come to the library. And the reception was amazing. Everyone was so happy to come back to the library. They were like, some people were like, I haven't been to a library since I was a kid. And I was like, that's great, you need to come back, because libraries are important, and if we don't support libraries and if we don't push, they'll disappear, and I don't want that, I don't want a situation where I can't. I mean, there's 100,000 books in here. Like, I could spend my whole life reading books in here, and that's really important. And on top of that, it's extremely sustainable to share books because you're using less paper, and you can. There's so much to learn from all of these walls of books, and so that's why I did a show in the library, because I wanted to bring all those people back to a library. And Ted Joans coming here and the signed copies was a plus. And I think Ted kind of knew and kind of pushed me here, because I sent that email and I was like, there's nowhere in hell they're going to let me do a runway show with loud music and a bunch of people they don't know in their library. But I pressed send anyway.
It's always worth sending that email.
Yeah, and it happened. And then, I mean, stylistically, you gotta talk to Julie, because she created these characters. I only made the clothes, which is not as important. But yeah, I mean, came out extremely beautifully. They look like, I don't know, they look like modern day beatniks to me. But yeah, Julie, what was on your mind stylistically?
Well, yeah, it really was about thinking who the modern day beatnik is. The beatniks were dreamers, and I don't know if we're taught enough to dream in this day and age. Now more than ever, and and especially when it comes to books, we're not always given the freedom to dream. And so I wanted these guys to look like dreamers. I wanted that essence. I don't know, like I jokingly said earlier today that it was, like guys I dated in college, the poets, the painters, the musicians, etc. But it's like bringing all of the things that you love and then seeing them through these halls with all of the names and the references and the research that all of us dreamers surround ourselves with, and to give credit to Pierre and others on the team who enabled us to see them in quirky, interesting ways, from photographer like Stanislas, who was with us, and Pierre snuck little video cameras through, iPhones in various places in in the books, you know, to see these dreamers in action. And also it was especially wonderful seeing the audience rifle through the books, you know, and come to another idea that they didn't expect that they would have on a Sunday morning in the museum, you know. So yeah, I mean, they're all just dreamers, really.
I love that you say that, because one of the themes that we're exploring in our programming at the library this spring is the idea of the library as a space of play, that all these books are here for you to play with, for you to take into your hands and hold and learn from. And something I was so struck by, I'm not sure if this was planned, but one of the models at the show was walking around with a book in his hands. So the fact that you can access these shelves and then incorporate that into your fashion and your look as well and walk around with a book.
That was Julie's idea.
Well, voila.
That's why I said the clothes are less important.
We come back to community, right? It's the collective work, it's the collaboration.
We all work together.
We have time for one more question, I think, and then we will turn to our very eager audience. We haven't talked about this season's Menswear Fashion Week at all yet, aside from Winnie, which is obviously the star of the show. But there were many other things that we saw as well. So very quickly, I want you to tell us what was most surprising for you that you saw for this round of Fashion Week, and what you're most excited about from both of you. We'll start with Julie.
I mean, in all truth, I haven't seen as much because I've been behind the scenes working with other brands and spending a lot of time with Idris. No, I mean, I think it was interesting for me to see how much of America rang through a lot of the collections, you know. I mean, I think Pharrell made a lot of noise with Vuitton, you know, and again, these are things that we have to think about. You know, one could love it, one could hate it, one could love the expression and, you know, the voices that he collaborated with, or they can judge it another way. But I think at the end of it, it's that process of thinking that ultimately, you know, is intriguing to me. Brands like Head Manor, I love, again, a brilliant tailor who can break the rules because I'm always very attracted to things like that. Gosh, what else? I don't know. My brain is empty of ideas.
No, but I'm glad you
so
brought up
focused
the America dimension, because this was a fascinating phenomenon. We had the Vuitton show where there were cowboys, right? It was Western themed. Yeah.
Cowboys and Indians,
Yeah.
to use the improper word,
Yeah.
but the childhood game.
Yeah, and Loewe too. I think was
Yes,
inspired by
Loewe.
American pop art and stuff like that. And us with Ted Joans.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I do agree that American. I mean, I think I feel like America always has an influence on fashion, and maybe it doesn't get as much credit as it deserves for the overlooming kind of inspiration that it brings to fashion. But this season as well, I also saw a lot of return to real clothing, which I thought was very nice. I love the idea of, you know, trying to just create better, more sustainable, beautiful clothes that don't, you know, that just add more, you know, good energy to the world versus negative.
Adding beauty to the world versus making a statement, you know, rupture, breaking.
You know, like I really despise wastefulness. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's from being a kid and being raised in a household that we didn't have much. But I really don't. I really despise when people just are wasteful. You know, we have to try to be sustainable, and we have to understand that. Again, I hate to use the word again. Community. That we're all one. We're all one. We're all one person, one species, one mankind trying to survive here. You know, the world doesn't rotate around just myself. And so I'm going to be gone in 30 years. Or maybe not 30.
Hopefully a bit longer.
A lot longer, hopefully. But I'll be gone in a few, you know, and then what? Like Ted's gone, but he's still here, you know, and you have to make sure the reason you're still here is positive, you know. And so, yeah.
Can we have a round of applause? Thank you both for such an amazing, thoughtful, dynamic conversation. We have time now to turn to questions from our audience. So we'll start with our in-person audience. Raise your hand, and Alfonso will bring you a microphone. And if you're on Zoom, just hold tight and we'll get to you as well. Yeah.
Hello. It was really great listening to you guys. I have a bunch of questions. I have 3 off the top of my head, so you can pick and choose which one you want to answer, or if you just want to answer one, it's fine. So first question is about like the intent to effect pipeline. So you guys talked a lot about how starting out with styling or designing a piece, you're thinking about what you want to show, like what you want to express. But then the effect is kind of out of your control. It's the audience. And then you also mentioned that the entire process is split among many different people. So I'm wondering how you guys like deal with the uncertainty of that, like whether or not you're trusting it. Is there like some sort of process that you have? Like when do you know if it's been successful? And how do you see that? Should I list all the 3 questions and then you choose, or should we stop? Because that was a long question.
I like that question.
Okay.
But I mean, should we answer that one, or you wanna keep hearing them? Oh yeah. That's a good idea. Yeah. So I'll take that one, and she'll take the next one. So I mean, very good question. Very. I haven't heard a question like that all week. So that's the best question I've had all week. I like that. So yeah, I mean, intention is extremely important, and effect is also extremely important. And yeah, you know, it is true that though you might have good intention, the effect might not be what you might have wanted, and that happens sometimes. You know, sometimes I create a collection, and I think it's going to be a certain way, and then it's completely terrible, and I am upset. You know, but sometimes you do something and it's beautiful. I think you can't get hung up on, I mean, you have to get hung up on effect in a way, but you also have to keep going. Like, I mean, for example, when you say that question, one of the things that comes to mind to me is production, right? So when you design a garment and you design a shirt or you design a trouser or whatever, and it needs to now be made, you need to give that to a factory or a tailor, and you might not know, sometimes you might not know who exactly is touching it or making it or anything like that. And I try to really see as much and oversee as much as I can. Like, I stay in Vicenza, which is a super small town in Italy, or just away a little bit outside of Venice, because we work with factories there. And I'm always hounding them, and I'm always like trying to oversee things. But then we also make knitwear in Mongolia, and I can't go to Mongolia, you know. So I don't know what's necessarily happening, but I try to stay on it. And I think that's all we can do, because as humans, we have to understand we can't control it all. You know, some things are out of our hands. Intention to me is though effect is important, I think intention is the most important, because 9 times out of 10, if your intention is correct, then the process will come out correct. But if in chance the effect is terrible, you know, at least you know you had good intentions versus having terrible intentions and then the effect also being terrible. So,
Well, just to speak a little bit about, you know, there's the intention of what you do with the collection, the intention of what we've done with the show, the intention of how you expect a collection will be perceived. And then the fun part of the effect of not being in control of that is then seeing how the wearer takes it to a next level, you know, like I may have styled these looks to look like this, but someone with the exact same pieces in their closet are then going to do something altogether different, or they're going to mix it with, a band t-shirt they've had, since they're 14, or their favorite pair of shoes or what have you. And so that's where the effect becomes fun, and the letting go, you know, seeing how it then works in the outside world. It's like, you know, you're part A, I then become part B, and, you know, and the team becomes part B, A plus to my B, and, you know, and all of that. But then it goes out into the world, and so that part is where letting go of control is the most fun, seeing it in the real world.
Other questions?
Thank you very much. It was really, really thoughtful. I wanted to say, I guess my question is somewhat philosophical, I would say. How are you defining success for yourself? In that, the two things that come to mind, you mentioned how you despise waste. And this is an industry where that happens a lot. The other thing I thought about in parallel is, you know, African heritage, and then your current profession isn't one that's typical, right? And when you look at them in Nigeria, it's usually, you can have male tailors, very few designers. So I was wondering if you got support from your family, and, you know, the experiences you've had that have brought you to this point, how are you defining success?
No, it's a good question. Thank you. To answer your question, no, my Nigerian parents do not approve of me being a designer. I mean, they do now, but they did not before. You know, I mean, it's not their fault. You know, like they're Nigerian immigrants who moved, you know, to England and then America. So they wouldn't understand necessarily what I'm doing, and they were looking out for me, and they want me to have job security, you know. So if you have a trade, or if you're a doctor, or you're an engineer, they feel like you'll always have work. And so it's sort of them trying to show me their love in a tough way. But I mean, we crossed over that bridge. And then to your second point, which was how do I define success? I mean, first of all, I mean, my mom coming to my office at Tom Ford once and like saying, "Oh, you have a real job." That was a successful moment for me, for sure. But how do I define the success? I think I define success by being able to do what I love every day. You know, like, I'm so grateful every day when I wake up that I can just hang out with friends and go to the studio and just, you know, talk about Ted Joans and surround myself with jazz and play jazz poetry and hang out with Julie. And yeah, it's work, but, you know, it's not, you know, I love it. So it's not work, and I think that's how I define success, that I can do this, you know, every single day.
I mean, I guess you said it in your last words. I mean, I say I get paid to play, you know. I get to hang out with friends and work with people I love, and as a result, we walk through libraries and have talks, and so yeah, I don't know. I think success is just being able to do what you love. You know, it's not an economic one, and of course, you know, economics play into every single one of our lives. However, in the instance of this, I'm very grateful that every day I wake up and I'm going to work, but I'm going to play. Yeah.
Other questions?
Thank you very much. It was really, really interesting. I have a question for Julie. When you said that the models, their clothes looks like they came out from their closet, and you talk about costume, what is a costume for you?
What is a costume for me? I mean, a costume, that's a great question. Thank you. I mean, I think a costume is more specifically directed to a theme or a storytelling that might be specific, you know, say in the nature of theater or, you know, or in a film, you know, in a period context. You know, I think as a stylist, I'm always trying to express some essence of how people wear their clothes, or if you know, in an editorial story or in the aspect of a runway, you know, you may not wear every single piece, but my hope is that there's something that you resonate with, that you know, that people can see themselves or some aspect of themselves that they can find some sort of a connection with. So in that sense, it's different than costume, where, yeah, I guess for me, costume is more pointed and directed, where I'm always trying to find a certain universality even in something that would seem specific, like a particular collection, for example.
I'm really curious to know, what does legacy mean to you? Just piggybacking off of the previous question, I think one of the main critiques of the industry is wastefulness, but also that there's this idea that it can be really vanishing and temporal. And I'm really curious if legacy and that aspect is incorporated in your work, or how you feel about that, especially explaining the meaning behind the brand's name. I want to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about wastefulness and sustainability and things like that, like, yeah, fashion is extremely wasteful. You know, there's so many different ways that fashion is wasteful, from factories that aren't being managed well, to people not being treated well, to you know, pollution, to polyester being made in those factories, destroying water supplies. And WINNIE, and I also hate to like say, hey, you know, we and WINNIE, we're super sustainable. You know, we only work with a factory in Mongolia that, raise their own sheep and only shear the sheep with a brush and all that type of stuff, which we do, but I hate that I have to say like, oh, we at WINNIE do that, because it makes it seem like I'm saying, oh, it's not my problem, like I'm doing my part, you know. I wish we got together like this in the fashion industry and just said, hey, you know, we're killing the earth, let's try to figure it out, because it's really not that hard. Like, it's not that hard. Like, choose fabrics you like, reuse them every season, use sustainable factories. Don't use polyester. Maybe, you know, like,
Just a hint, just an
maybe
idea.
don't use child labor. I don't know. Like, it's not that hard. Like, I've managed to create a business and never done any of those things. So, yeah, I mean, sustainability-wise, we really try to prioritize making sure that, you know, whatever we're doing is not killing the earth. And then, as it pertains to legacy, yeah, I mean, the brand is named after my grandmother, who I loved very, very dearly. She really inspired me every single day, and in that sense, I think it makes a lot of things easier for me. It makes the idea of community easier for me, because it's not really my brand. You know, it's my grandmother's brand. And it allows for me to think about it not from a I need it now perspective. Like, I don't need the brand to be the biggest brand in the world today. I might not do it. It might be, I don't know, my grandson, you know, who can get WINNIE to a global idea or identity or whatever. But for me, I'm just doing things I like to do with my friends, and yeah, and putting my grandmother's name in articles like Vogue and stuff like that. I mean, it's amazing. You guys have that fashion archive right there, and think about the names and the people and all of those things. So I'm really amazed sometimes to be able to like go on a New York Times article or on a Vogue article or GQ or whatever, or just seeing a person walking down the street and they've got like my grandmother's name on the back of their neck, you know, it's really cool. So yeah, I mean, legacy means everything to me. I talk to my team about that all the time. I think, you know, you have to leave something on this earth, and it'd be great for that to be something that's beautiful, you know, some type of memory that's beautiful, because then it does stuff like this. We're all in this room because of Ted, you know, not because of me, but because of Ted. He inspired me, and through that, it brought me here. And I think that's really important.